In this second video, I'm going to show you how an amateur player can use this concept of the power of the queen, or keeping the balance between the white and the black queen in a chess game, to oppose a professional chess player. So the game that I'm going to show you now is game that I play as black against Daniel Lueck. Was a simultaneous exhibition at the University of Florida. So it starts as a Philidor defense, the Hanan variation. It's a very strong opening. It's very difficult for white to crack it because black plays to set up a strong point on e5. Here we see that Daniel is playing very aggressive with pawn to g4. The idea behind pawn to g4 is to dislodge this knight from f6. Black has two options. One is to take the pawn and try to take the play to capitalize on white's overextended pawns on the king side, or try to stabilize the position. In this game, I play h6, preventing the pawn from gaining more space, and Daniel defends the g4 pawn with h3. And here finally I push e5, cementing my position in the center and creating giving my pieces some space too. So now we see that the knight that was on g1 is actually coming to the g3 square, where it's going to have a lot of influence on this square, on the f5 square. I continue with my development, bishop to e7. Why Daniel tried also to clear the path of his king and castle, and I play c6. The idea behind I have two ideas behind pawn to c6. One is to control the d5 square, making it difficult for the knight on c3 to jump into my position. But more importantly, I want to open up a hatch for my queen to operate on the queen side and the center. Daniel developed his bishop to e3, and I start with active operations on the king side with b5. You can see that this pawn push on b5 is very similar to the g4 thrust that Daniel tried early on in the game. Again, white's played e3. The idea is to stop the pawn from advancing to b4, and I play my queen to c7. The idea behind queen c7, as I said before, is to have influence on the king side along this diagonal, and influence on the queen side this way, along the c file. White castles, and I play knight to b6. The idea here is to transfer my knight to the c4 square and pressurize the e3 bishop. White covers the c4 square with b3, and I gain more space with a5. Daniel starts mobilizing his king side pieces, counter on the queen side, and finally the knight that was on g1 make it to f5. Of course, I cannot tolerate that strong piece, and I take it out with my bishop on c8. White recaptures, and now we have a very interesting point here. As you remember, maybe from something that you read or something that people say, or even what I said in the first video, it's very good for you to have your king castle. Here, I wait on keeping my king in the corner castle because actually I need that tempo. As you see, I have been very active with my pawns and my pieces, but at this point I have to castle. So it's very important to remember, you don't castle because you don't know what to do, but actually when it's the right timing to do so. For example, here I have to castle because if I don't do that, this knight on b5 is attacking my pawn on b5, and when I recapture with my pawn, the bishop on b5 on g2 will actually take my rook, winning the exchange. That's the reason because I castle. I castle to put my king into safety, but also because I want to defend the rook or take this thing out of the tactic against my b5 pawn and my rook on e8. So it's very important when you play these high-rated opponents, okay? You have this game plan about trying to make your queen as strong as their queen, but also you need to be engaged on what they are trying to do to you. So I castle. Daniel's break up the center with f4. I jump at the opportunity to play knight d5. Strong piece that has to be taken out by white. We trade on the light squares, and now we have the critical moment in the middle game. We see that black has more space on the queen side, but white is already getting very close to my king. And after I take, here's what I'm talking about. My queen, immediately after white start getting too close to my king, my queen penetrates his position, putting pressure not only on the rook on a8, but also on the unprotected bishop on e3, and also having influence all over my opponent's king side. So it forces white to defend the bishop with rook f3, and I have a chance now to advance with my pawn with tempo, attacking the rook on f3 that goes to g3. Well, now I realize that my queen is active and how I can coordinate my pieces better. The plan that I have in this game was to play g6, and after my opponent pushes on f6 and my bishop goes to the a, I try to draw a group with my queen, attacking this pawn on h3. As you see, I try to counter my opponent's active operation with my queen, trying to target his queen, his weakest spots. So here, after queen c8, plays b4, closing the flank, and I counter attacking the pawn on d4. Here, white gets ready to activate his queen. And you see, the queen is taking control over the square that I was targeting with my queen. So now I have to do something else. Okay, he's taking away my springboard square on c3, and what I did was to play king h7. It seems like a very rare move. What I am trying to do here, well, the answer is very simple. I want to transfer my rook to the h file and start attacking this weak pawn on h3. So my opponent, he has an idea. He's also, he's a very strong player, 24 at that time. He's now a grandmaster. At that time he was 2460. So he plays queen to f4. An idea here, which I considered briefly, was to move my queen to f5 and oppose my opponent's queen with my own queen. Instead, I really want to win this game. So I tried a more aggressive approach with rook to h8. I sacrificed the pawn on d6, of course, because I thought that this tactic would work. I was banking on this bishop attacking the rook on g3. And what happened is here that I overlook what my opponent has in mind, or what was the counter. If you remember the game number one, the video one that I showed you, that black was threatening queen b6, check against a king on g1, taking an unprotected rook. But then white counters with a mating threat. Here is exactly the same situation. After I sacrifice the second pawn, I realize that I'm getting checkmated. So if I take the rook, if I take this rook on g3, my opponent will take, the queen will take on f7, and I will be checkmated just by the queen. It can illustrate the power of the queen. You know, even a queen can deliver checkmate with the help of a couple of pawns. So I have to move my king back to g8 to defend that threat, checkmate. And now my opponent counters with this deadly pin. It's a very unpleasant pin, and I think that at this point I am very close to losing this game. I'm probably losing at this point. So how I can stop my, I have multiple troubles, a lot of problems in this position. One is the pin, and also that this queen is attacking my rook. So if I break the pin, my rook will be unprotected. So I remember I was calculating at this time many options, but I want to be consistent with my strategy. And my strategy was, if his queen is attacking me, my queen should be doing the same. So instead of playing passive, let's stop the video and try to figure out what to do as black. How are you going to save the day? I mean, it's a very tough position. What are you going to do? Okay, if you manage to find this move, rook to h3, that will be awesome. The idea behind this move is that I'm attacking his rook that is unprotected, right? It's the one that is creating more damage. Let's go over the sequence. If he takes, I will take with my queen, and when he takes my rook on h8, and I go away, turns out that the white king is boxed in. He is in the killing box. It means that it's being cornered by the queen, and now this bishop is also putting the king on a crossfire, and he's gonna be checkmated by force. So let's play a move. If the white queen takes on e4, I will check with my bishop, then discover attack, king moves, check, king goes to f1, and checkmate. So it would be a very, very nice way to end the game, especially against a 2400 player, considering that at that time I was a B player, around 1720, 1718 US Chess Federation rating. And of course, my opponent is very strong, and he found something. He found a counter sacrifice. Now his queen is the one counter my attack. He sacrificed the queen on h8, and after if I capture the queen, he can capture my rook, and he's gonna have two rooks for my queen. I don't gonna explain exactly what I played this move, but since my rook is lost anyway, I give white this check, and the idea is that now the king is in the way of this rook and cannot penetrate my position along the h file. Because if you remember, my king is also in the killing box. And it can be checkmated. If the both rooks give me a check on h8, it will be checkmate. So by moving the rook to h1, I force the king to an unfavorable square. So I take the queen after, the queen after that, and at this point we agree on a draw. Why a draw? Well, it turns out, let's just go over what was in my mind. If he takes my bishop, I will discover attack against his bishop here, right, along this diagonal. And we'll capture his bishop next. See, if at the end of the combination he ended up with a queen and a bishop for my queen, I will be losing. But thanks to moving his king, forcing his king to h1, I have this tactic that saves the day. To wrap up this video, I want to go back to this part again where you see both queens, they are opposing. Not only on the board, but also as part of the player's strategy. You see that when my queen wants to attack him, he counter-sacrifices with his queen for my two rooks to keep the balance. Well, I hope this video shows you that even a player that is not mastered like I was at that time, only 1700, I can hold my own, or you can hold your ground against high-rated opposition if you have a clear game plan. And the simple one is to match your opponent's queen with your own queen. Try to keep the dynamics. Okay, thank you for your time, and let's get tuned for the next video.